the things that the other folks told you about today, the watering and the weeding, are really closely connected to pest management, because it's amazing if you have a healthy plant that has plenty of water and plenty of sunshine and plenty of air, and you've taken the weeds away from it. It's amazing what a plant can withstand. So, as I feel like I have the least important topic of everybody here. So with that, pest management. So when you think about pests in your garden, we like to teach sort of a integrated pest management approach to thinking about your pests. So number one, thinking about how can you prevent the pests from coming at all. And then moving into a little bit more invasive, if they come in, is there a way that you can remove them with like a mechanical or a physical control? And then if you can't do that, can you use some sort of biological control, which is a little more hands-on, a little more invasive, and has more consequences for your garden? And finally, if all else fails, are there chemical controls? So next slide. So with pest management, I think the most important thing is that you sometimes go outside in your garden and do absolutely nothing. So one of my favorite things to do is just to go in the morning and walk my garden. And I just, like, while I'm out there, I kind of peek at the leaves and maybe look under the leaves, but I like to, I'm not watering, I'm not weeding, I'm just hanging out in my garden. Sometimes I'm thinking about how beautiful it is. But by keeping an eye on things, I notice when something is off. And if I can catch things early, I can often have a way to control a problem before it gets crazy. So, and I know what things look like. So when something's different and off, I know, wait, something's wrong. So checking your plants is really important. And then another thing that, another main message that we really wanted to get across to you about pests is you may not mind some of the pests. I think in these Master Gardener talks, we sometimes make it sound like this is the way to have a perfect garden and just do this and don't do that. And what we don't want to be saying to you is your garden has to be perfect. Every plant has to be perfect. Bugs and other pests happen. They happen to every single gardener here. All the advice we give you is based on things that have happened in our garden and will happen in our garden probably this year. So you might develop a tolerance for that. It might not be a bad thing to have a few bugs. In fact, we all have a few bugs in our garden. Next slide. But if you do find things that maybe you don't want to be there, and we will later kind of look at what some of those things might be. Beyond prevention and having healthy plants, physical controls are one way that you can remove pests or keep them away from your plants, and without much other consequence for your garden. Next slide. And sometimes that just means picking off the bugs. So there's, for me, there are certain caterpillars or certain beetles that I know about that I might just pluck them off and put into a jar of alcohol, and or maybe with the weeds into my yard debris bin, and that is the most that I do to control them. But physical control also might be something a little bit stronger. So I do actually use drip irrigation as my main irrigation strategy, but there are certain pests that I know the best way to get rid of them is to just take that garden hose with a high pressure stream and spray the plants. So for example, my broccoli plants get a spray of water on a regular basis, even though most of my garden has drip irrigation, just because it attracts the kind of insects that can be controlled pretty well with water. Next slide. But physical controls and removing pests can also apply to creating barriers to protect your plants. Now, this curriculum was developed in Portland, and so somehow they don't bring up fencing a lot, but I know that there are several people who I've talked to in this class who are going to garden in a rural area, or maybe you're gardening in North Corvallis, and fencing your garden may be something that you really seriously want to consider, because your main pest might be deer. And if you do have deer in your area, you might consider that deer can jump over an 8-foot, 7-foot, 8-foot fence, and an 8-foot, 9-foot fence is really what you need in order to keep the deer out. So it's something to consider if you're gardening in a rural area. Likewise, rabbits will eat your plants, and you can kind of create some smaller, lower fences to keep out rabbits. You can use chicken wire to keep out rabbits. I know there's people who put hardware cloth over their growing beds to keep out their cat, who's their main pest digging in their raised bed. My husband and I are going to be digging out one of our raised beds this year and we're putting a hardware cloth under the soil, because the last 3 years there have been a huge explosion of voles and gophers in the valley, and we can no longer grow root crops in there. So physical controls can keep out a lot of the things that cause crop failure. Next slide. Now, biological control, I think, is a little more complicated, but is an interesting strategy. So under biological control, I would actually include choosing varieties that have a certain amount of resistance to disease, which I guess could be considered a pest. Biological control, sometimes people will plant flowers to attract beneficial insects, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit more. A lot of the flowers in the same family with carrots and parsley that have a flowering head that looks a little bit like an umbrella. A lot of those are great for attracting beneficial insects that are predators on the insects that are pests. And then some people use organic insecticides like BT that are a biological control. It's not a strategy that I use in my own garden, but it is something that some people use for like large fields of brassicas, like carrots and cabbage, not carrots, like broccoli and cabbage. Next slide. Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot I had a slide for this. So yes, the beneficial insects. I love it when I get praying mantises in my garden. They're like one of the best ever, and I do try to keep an eye around my fence line to see if I'm getting the cocoons for the praying mantises. They are a great predator, and they'll take out some insects that you don't want to be in your garden. Next slide. And then chemical control. So chemical control is sometimes the first thing that people think about when they see insects in their garden, they think, all right, what do I need to go get to get rid of this? And there are chemicals that people use in organic gardening. Some common ones are people will use Sluggo, which I think iron phosphate, in order to control slugs. And that's not one that I use at all. So I have a more biological control. So for we said we talk about slugs. This might be an okay time to talk about slugs. So you could use Sluggo, and I would be willing to bet there are people on this call who do use that for control. So my control is timing. I plant late. So when I plant late, it's not as wet and there aren't as many slugs. I have ducks. So the ducks run around my garden when it's not planted. They eat all the slug eggs up. And so I just don't have as many slugs because the slugs can't reproduce. And then when I see slugs, because someone brought up mulch, and mulch in raised beds can attract slugs. It creates these little like hiding holes that, my experience, I don't know what other people's experience here is. My experience is that with leaf mulch, especially, I will find slugs in there. If I do, then I go on a slug hunt and I use physical controls and I pick them out. And for me, that is enough to control slugs. Now, if I were to be having my garden much earlier and it was always wet, then maybe that's something that I would consider. Another chemical control that some people use for organic methods is neem oil. Neem oil is an insecticide, and so when you use an insecticide, it could have effects on other insects other than the ones that you were targeting. It gets mixed with water and soap. And then in between those two, I would say some people will use like a safer soap, like a product that is basically soap and water that makes it hard for the insects get smothered by it, but it's not, there's not a tremendous amount of chemical in it. So I think master gardeners recommend that you buy one because if you mix up your own, it's possible that you get the wrong formula and you might kill your plants, which is something that I have personally done. Too much Dr. Bronner's plus water can cause dead plants. All right, next slide. All right, are we ready? We're ready to play a game. All right, Jennifer,
Sure.
Are you going to play with me?
Sure, I don't know. You have to tell me what to do.
Okay, can you see your chat?
Can I see my chat? Yes.
So this is a game. It is called Good Bug, Bad Bug. So the way that we play is I will show you all a picture of a bug. It's not necessarily going to be a real bug in the biological sense, but I'm using bug very broadly to mean all insects. And so everybody needs to get their chat open. And when I show the bug, then someone who's monitoring the chat tell me, is it a good bug or is it a bad bug? Is this something that you do want in your garden or is this something that you do not want in your garden?
Okay, so our job is to say good or bad in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay, and Carol,
then we'll find out.
And Carol will be monitoring it?
Yeah, Carol, Carol, can you tell me what people say, whether people are guessing good bug or bad bug?
Yes, I can do that.
All right. And so Jennifer will do the slides. All right, so let's look at the first one.
Okay.
All right, Ladybug, good bug or bad bug?
Not lots of goods coming in here already.
Yes, I think Ladybug is one of the favorite good bugs. So can we have the next slide? So I think many of you know that the reason that why we love to have ladybugs in our gardens is not just because they're cute, but because they're actually fabulous predators and they will eat aphids, which are one of the things that many of us don't want growing we don't want living on our plants that can cause damage to our plants. So ladybugs are something that you can attract with having flowers around and in your garden. And you can buy them and release them into your garden, but I have pretty good luck attracting them. I've never, this presentation was, this slide was created by Elizabeth, who was here on the first night. And she says she has this strategy for spraying with whey and yeast on the plants, which I have not tried. I don't know if anyone else here has tried it, but maybe I will try it this year. So next bug. All right, cabbage worms, good bug or bad bug?
Camouflaged is sneaky.
All right, overwhelmingly bad.
I know. I think the picture gives it away if you looked at it from this view. Now, if I had shown what this looks like when it is an adult, then you may or may not have guessed. You may or may not have guessed that it was bad because it is. Next slide. It is the caterpillar of the cabbage white butterfly. So you see all those cute little white butterflies fluttering around your garden. They are going potentially something that's going to attack your cabbage leaves. I don't have a huge problem with them. I do pick them off if I see them. And apparently, you know, because there's these butterflies landing on them, you could use a cover to prevent them. All right, next slide. All right, next bug. Good bug or bad bug?
I'm seeing lots of goods show up.
Yes.
Hey,
Next
Leah,
slide.
Leah, just remember a couple of questions to answer, so leave yourself enough time.
Well, I may or may not know the answers, but we can work as a team. So, so the green lacewings are another one that are a very helpful predator. And again, you can attract them through planting in your yard of flowers. Next slide. Flea beetles.
Well, everybody knows they're bad.
I know there really aren't quite as many. There aren't quite as many mysteries here. But so flea beetles, next slide, are a challenge. I went 10 years without having flea beetles in my garden. They come in and they can really attack tomato plants. They can attack collards and broccoli. The nasturtiums also will get hit really hard with the flea beetles. And so hopefully maybe take some of the pressure off of the flea beetles. But they're often something that's not something that you did personally. They are something that often will hit like the whole area at once. Next slide. All right, centipede. Good bug or bad bug? Yes, I think so. Although they are a reason to wear your garden gloves. So we're not saying don't be careful about them, but they really do help you to build the healthy soil that you're trying to build. So you'll often find them in your compost pile. Next slide.
That's just gross.
Slugs.
It is really
That
gross.
picture.
Well, those, yeah, I think Elizabeth's slugs really are having a party.
Yeah, it's a beer
So
bust.
we already talked about slugs being a problem for so many people here. She has that picture. Some of you may have tried the old trick of trapping slugs in beer. And although I told you about my main slug control strategies, I have pulled out the container of beer before to attract them in a pinch. All right. The one other, oops, sorry. The one other thing I'd say is that that was on that slide is that slugs really do like to kind of hide underneath boards. And so I do think that's kind of an interesting strategy to catch them, is to put out a hiding place for them and then turn it over and pick them out. That way you can find them. All right, next slide. All right, and aphids. Aphids are an interesting creature. They're kind of soft-bodied, and they unfortunately like they suck. I don't know what I'm not being articulate. They're they are they make the I'm not being able to be articulate about aphids, but there are more than one kind of aphid. And so next slide. For me, I like to use different strategies for different types of aphids. So the ones that were just in those pictures, those gray aphids that that come into broccolis and kales and cabbage, I find that if you spray them down with water, that is very helpful. And also they're seasonal, so they might come into your garden and be on your kale in August, but after the freeze, they've died off and you have healthy kale. So I have a tolerance for them, and I will wash them off, the vegetables. If there's another kind of aphid that are small and green that are on tomato plants, and that is something that I keep a very close eye on when I bring starts into my garden. I look under the leaves to make sure that there aren't small green aphids on them. And if there are, I make sure that I brush them off, or maybe use a little bit of a very dilute soap on the plants, so that all of my young growing plants don't get eaten by them. I don't worry about them so much once the plants get bigger. Good bug or bad bug?
I think we're seeing a couple of bads here so far.
All right, let's see. So this is another one of the tricky ones, right? This was another one of the predators. So I think our point in going through these is just that you don't always know. And so it's fun to try to look up. If you see an insect on your plant, it's fun to look it up. But the master gardeners are really a fantastic resource for helping you sort through what is really going on with your plants. So if you do have something on your plants and your plants look very unhappy, then the master gardeners are really a great resource to help you sort out, is it something you do want to have or something that you don't want to have around your garden? All right, next slide. Good bug or bad bug? Cucumber beetle.
One person has ventured a bad.
Yep, I see a couple. All right, next slide.
There's some more.
Yes, this is definitely something that if you are growing cucumbers, you probably want to keep your eyes open, and are pretty easy to just pick off and remove with a manual control. Next slide. Leaf miners, good bug or bad bug? Next slide.
Bad's rolling in.
I know, it's like you would not want your plants to look like that. So leaf miners are very easy to get in your chard and your beets, but you might develop a tolerance. Like it might not be that you have that many, you might have some pretty leaves and some not pretty leaves. You can pick those bad leaves off. Or if it's something that really bothers you, you might be able to cover up your beets and your chard when they're young, just so that they don't have eggs laid onto them. Next slide. And questions.
There was a question about, back a bit, what bugs could be eating seeds or just germinated plants?
So lots of things could be eating seeds or just germinated plants. So it could be a bug. It could be a mouse. You know, my friend, one of my good friends, has a mouse in her greenhouse, and she's been gardening for years, and it's driving her crazy. It could be ants taking away your seeds, collecting the seeds. It's a little early for ants, but I certainly have had that happen. I've also had ants bring aphids into my greenhouse. So sometimes the aphid control in my greenhouse is actually the same as controlling sugar ants in my house, with a little bit of borax. And then there are also some of the decomposing, so sometimes slugs will eat your early plants if they're outside or even in a wet greenhouse. And then something else that is around here in the Willamette Valley in the soil is called like a symphyllin, and I didn't have a picture of that one, but they often like eat the roots of young plants coming up. So that's some things I thought of. Maybe some other folks have other ideas.
I was going to say birds can get seeds too. They're not insects, but they still do like to snag those seeds sometimes.
I had to plant beans 3 times last year because the crows kept coming back. I ended up having to put the chicken wiry stuff over them because, yeah, the crows were terrible.
So here, Jennifer, we had to do that too. Corn and beans, both.
But it's kind of like, you know how we
Squirrels are terrible. Yeah.
I guess if I could have one message though, you know, it's kind of like we teach the kids to be resilient. Like, you know, you're going to plant some things that don't come up, and then you're going to look at your list and say, is it too late to plant? And if you really want the thing, maybe you'll plant again. And if that doesn't work, maybe you'll go out and buy some starts. You know, like I think like you can expect multiple failures in your garden before something goes right. And that's just normal for all of us.
Another question that came up was when to use nematodes.
I don't use nematodes. Does anyone else here use them?
I've only used them once, and it was for rhododendrons. They were some kind of weevil that was notching the edges, but I've not used nematodes in the vegetable garden.